I never thought of myself as the suspicious type. Maybe that's why the feeling came so late, creeping in not like a storm, but like a draft slipping through a crack in the window. At first, I didn't pay attention. I was too wrapped in the rhythm of my life: morning coffee, the familiar drive down rain-slick streets, the smell of old books in the university library where I worked. I lived in Seattle long enough to get used to the constant drizzle, the way the sky seemed permanently overcast, the way the city's lights reflected against puddles at night. There was a comfort in it, a background noise to my marriage, to the life I thought I knew. Her name is Emily. My wife. She's 32, 2 years younger than me, with auburn hair that catches what little sunlight breaks through the clouds. She has this laugh, soft, unforced, that I used to think was mine alone to hear in the quiet spaces of our home. We met 6 years ago at a friend's housewarming party, one of those nights where everyone drinks too much wine out of mismatched glasses and tells stories they half remember the next day. Somehow, among the noise, we found each other in the kitchen, talking about nothing and everything. I remember walking her home under the street lamps, my jacket around her shoulders, already imagining futures I didn't dare speak aloud. A year later, we were married. Our apartment is on Capitol Hill, a modest 2-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. The walls creak when the wind picks up, and the heating is temperamental in the winter, but we made it ours. Photos from our trips line the hallway, Emily smiling against the Grand Canyon backdrop, the two of us holding paper cups of hot cider at Pike Place Market during Christmas, blurry selfies from nights out with friends. Looking at them always gave me the sense that our life was tangible, solid. Something worth holding on to. And yet, the change was so subtle I almost convinced myself I imagined it. It started with her phone. Not the phone itself, but the way she handled it. Emily used to leave it lying around, on the kitchen counter while she cooked, on the nightstand while she showered, even face up on the couch when she drifted off to sleep beside me. But one night, I noticed her flip it over, screen down, when I sat next to her. It was small. Insignificant, maybe. But the gesture stuck with me. Then came the late nights. She said work was piling up, that the firm was taking on new clients, that deadlines were brutal. She's a graphic designer, freelancing for small businesses around the city, and sometimes projects did demand long hours. I believed her, why wouldn't I? But when she walked in past midnight, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, or when she came home already changed out of her work clothes, something in me stirred. I told myself I was paranoid. That I was stressed, overthinking, seeing shadows in the rain. Still, I started to notice details. The way she laughed at texts she never showed me. The new lingerie I hadn't seen her wear in our bedroom. A softness in her eyes when she drifted into thought, as if she were replaying a memory not meant for me. The city, too, seemed to conspire against me. Seattle nights are quiet in our part of town, except for the occasional siren or the hum of traffic below. But in that quiet, my mind filled the gaps with questions. I'd lie awake, the sound of rain against the window like static, wondering where she really was, who she was smiling at when her phone buzzed in her pocket. I didn't confront her. Not then. I wanted proof. I wanted certainty. After all, accusing her without reason would shatter something fragile between us, something I wasn't ready to lose. So I watched. I listened. I waited. One Saturday morning, she said she was meeting a client downtown. I offered to drive her. It was raining harder than usual, sheets of water blurring the view from our windows, but she shook her head quickly. Too quickly. No, it's fine, she said, pulling on her coat. I don't want to drag you out in this weather. I'll just take the bus. She kissed me before leaving, light and hurried, like an obligation rather than a desire. The door closed behind her, and the silence in the apartment pressed in on me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty coffee cup on the table, the steam gone, the ring of moisture staining the wood beneath it. Something inside me tightened. Against my better judgment, I pulled on my jacket and followed. Downtown Seattle on a rainy Saturday isn't exactly anonymous. People huddle under umbrellas, dart in and out of cafes, taxis spray water as they rush through intersections. I stayed back, keeping my hood up, my heart pounding harder than it should have. Emily walked with her phone in her hand, glancing at it every few steps, her lips curving into a small smile at whatever message she was reading. She didn't go to an office building. She didn't stop at a coffee shop to meet a client. Instead, she turned into the lobby of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, the kind of place neither of us could afford to casually visit. I stopped across the street, rain dripping down my face, blending with the heat of my breath. My chest felt tight. I couldn't move. I couldn't follow her inside. I just stood there, watching the revolving doors spin slowly after she disappeared. For a long moment, I told myself it meant nothing. Maybe she was meeting someone important. Maybe it was business. But as the minutes stretched, as the rain soaked through my jacket and into my bones, I knew. I didn't want to know, but I did. When I finally walked away, I felt hollow. The city around me blurred into gray shapes, the neon signs bleeding across puddles, the sound of traffic muffled by the roar in my ears. That night, Emily came home smiling. She dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, shook off her umbrella, and kissed me like nothing was wrong. She smelled faintly of wine and something floral that wasn't her perfume. She told me about her client, about revisions and deadlines, about how exhausting the day had been. Her eyes met mine without a flicker of guilt. And I smiled back. I smiled and nodded and asked the right questions. Because I needed time. Because I wasn't ready to end the life we'd built. Not yet. But the seed was planted. And seeds, once planted, don't stop growing. The following week unfolded with the same rhythm as always, at least on the surface. I went to work at the university library, spent hours cataloging donations, answering emails, dealing with undergrads who asked for books they could have found themselves if they'd looked harder. The library smelled of dust and coffee, the way it always did, and the quiet should have been comforting. But lately, quiet felt like the enemy. Quiet meant I could hear my own thoughts, and my thoughts had grown darker by the day. At night, Emily moved around our apartment with a kind of practiced ease. She cooked pasta, she watered the plants on the windowsill, she laughed at sitcom reruns with me on the couch. It was all so ordinary, so routine, that I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Almost. But then she'd glance at her phone with that slight curve of her lips. Or she'd step into the hallway to take a call, lowering her voice just enough that I couldn't catch the words. Once, when I asked who it was, she said, "Oh, just work," too quickly, too casually. One evening, I decided to test her. We were sitting on the couch, a half-empty bowl of popcorn between us, some comedy playing on TV. She had her phone in her hand, scrolling absently. "Can I see your phone for a sec?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Mine's charging in the bedroom and I want to look something up." For the briefest moment, I saw it, the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, the way her thumb tightened around the device. But then she smiled and handed it to me. "Sure," she said, as if nothing was wrong. I opened the browser, typed something random, pretended to read. The screen felt hot in my hand, like it was holding secrets I wasn't allowed to touch. My heart raced, and I hated myself for feeling like a thief in my own living room. I didn't look through her messages. I didn't have the courage. When I gave it back, she was watching me closely, her smile a little too careful. Later that night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was steady, calm, as if she had no weight on her conscience. My chest ached with the silence I kept between us. Seattle in November has a way of amplifying loneliness. The days are short, the nights are long, and the sky is a constant shade of gray. I found myself walking home slower than usual after work, stopping at Pike Place Market even when I had nothing to buy, just to be among strangers. The smell of roasted coffee beans, the chatter of tourists, the neon sign glowing through the mist, it all reminded me of the life Emily and I once shared without tension, when everything between us was effortless. But now, every time she smiled, I wondered who she was smiling for. Every time she touched my arm, I wondered who else she had touched. The first real crack came one Friday evening. She told me she had a late meeting with a client in Ballard, one of those trendy neighborhoods full of breweries and boutique shops. She promised she'd be back by 10. At 10, she wasn't home. At 11, still nothing. I called her once, twice. No answer. When the sound of her key finally turned in the lock close to midnight, I was sitting in the dark, the TV silent, the apartment heavy with unasked questions. She stepped inside, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly damp from the rain. "You're still up," she said, surprised. "Where were you?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. She blinked, then forced a laugh. "I told you. Client meeting. It ran late. Until midnight." Her smile faltered. "You know how these things go." She set her bag down, slipped off her coat. "Why are you sitting in the dark? You're scaring me." I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to rip the truth out of her. But instead, I just shook my head. I couldn't sleep. She crossed the room and kissed me. Her lips were warm, familiar, but I tasted something metallic, sharp, like the ghost of red wine. That night, I dreamed of her standing under the hotel's golden lobby lights, her hair catching the glow as she smiled at someone who wasn't me. The next day, she was sweetness itself, making pancakes, kissing my cheek, suggesting we go for a walk by the waterfront. It was almost worse than the suspicion. It felt like she was papering over a crack in the wall with bright wallpaper, hoping I wouldn't notice the damage underneath. I told myself I needed evidence. Something undeniable. Otherwise, it would just be my paranoia against her words, and she was better at lying than I was at doubting. So I started paying closer attention. I checked the mileage on her car when she said she was running errands. I memorized the sound of her ringtone, the way she silenced it with a quick flick of her thumb. I noted the unfamiliar scent on her scarf one evening, sandalwood, distinctly masculine. Each clue was small, insignificant on its own. But together, they formed a picture I couldn't ignore. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. We were supposed to have brunch with friends, but she said she wasn't feeling well. "A migraine," she said, pressing a hand to her forehead. I offered to stay home with her, but she insisted I go without her. Reluctantly, I left. 2 hours later, on my way back, I passed a cafe near downtown. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw her. Emily. Sitting at a corner table with a man I didn't recognize. He was leaning forward, smiling at something she said. She was laughing, her hand brushing his across the table. It wasn't the casual laugh she gave coworkers or friends. It was the laugh she used to give me, years ago, when everything was still new and exciting. I stopped dead on the sidewalk, my heart slamming against my ribs. The people around me blurred into shadows as I stared through the glass. She looked happy. Radiant in a way I hadn't seen in months. I wanted to burst inside, to demand an explanation, to tear the facade apart. But my legs wouldn't move. Instead, I turned and walked away, the sound of my footsteps drowned out by the steady patter of rain. By the time I reached our apartment, I felt numb. The walls seemed closer than usual, the air heavier. I sat on the edge of the bed, my clothes still damp, my hands trembling. When Emily came home later, she carried a bag of groceries, her face bright and innocent. "Feeling better," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "Thought I'd make something for dinner." I nodded, forcing a smile. My throat felt tight, as though any word I spoke would break into pieces. I didn't tell her what I saw. Not yet. Because now I was sure. And certainty demands a plan. The following days felt like I was walking across thin ice, each step deliberate, each word chosen carefully. Emily and I carried on our routines, but beneath it all, I could sense the distance growing wider. It was like standing in the same room yet feeling oceans apart. I tried to study her, to find traces of guilt in her eyes, but she was careful. Too careful. She smiled when she needed to, laughed at the right moments, asked about my day. On the surface, she was still my wife, the same woman who had once cried on our wedding day, her voice trembling as she promised forever. But forever had started to feel temporary. One night, as she showered, I sat on the bed staring at her phone lying on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification, just a name I didn't recognize and a message preview too short to make sense of. My hand hovered over it, shaking. I didn't unlock it. Something in me recoiled at the thought of crossing that line. If I opened her phone, there would be no going back. And yet, not opening it left me trapped in limbo, half-blind and choking on doubt. When she came out of the bathroom, steam curling around her hair, she caught me staring at the phone. For a fraction of a second, her expression hardened, then softened again, like she had pulled a mask back over her face. "You okay?" she asked lightly, towel draped over her shoulders. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." She kissed my forehead, the way she always did, but the gesture felt hollow. That night, I dreamt of shadows moving behind closed doors. The next weekend, Emily said she needed to run errands. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. But the memory of her at that cafe lingered like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. After she left, I waited 10 minutes, then followed. Her car was already gone, but I knew her habits well enough. She liked small boutiques in Belltown, a bookstore near Pike Street, the artisan grocery shops closer to Queen Anne. I drove aimlessly through the city, the rain streaking across my windshield, until I spotted her car parked near a hotel. Not the Fairmont this time. A smaller place, tucked on a quieter street. I pulled over 2 blocks away, my chest tight. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to preserve whatever fragile illusion remained. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I saw her step out of the car, glance around once, then hurry toward the entrance. She wore the blue coat I'd bought her last winter, the one she said made her feel like herself. My stomach twisted at the thought that she'd chosen it for him. I didn't follow her inside. Instead, I sat in my car, rain pounding the roof, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Minutes dragged into an hour. Every person who exited the hotel made my pulse spike, but it was never her. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, tall, dark hair, his hand brushing hers as if it belonged there. They paused under the awning, laughing at something private. Then, without hesitation, she leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't a quick kiss. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, lingering, the kind of kiss meant for someone who owns a piece of your heart. My chest caved in. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My world, the world we'd built together, shattered in that single moment, fragments scattering where I couldn't reach them. I stayed hidden, my body frozen, watching the woman I loved with someone else. The rain blurred my vision, but not enough to hide the truth. Nothing could. When she finally walked back to her car, alone this time, I ducked low, heart hammering as she drove past without noticing me. I waited until her taillights disappeared into the wet night before I started my engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me, eyes hollow, jaw clenched, like a man I barely recognized. By the time I got home, she was already there. The apartment smelled of the candle she'd lit, vanilla and amber, cozy and familiar. She greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened, as if the kiss hadn't just torn our life apart. "Hey," she said, stirring a pot on the stove. "I thought I'd make pasta tonight. You hungry?" I stared at her, words lodged in my throat like glass shards. She looked so normal, so domestic, humming softly as she added sauce, reaching for the salt. I wanted to scream. To demand answers. To break every lie into pieces. Instead, I sat down at the table, my hands trembling under the wood. "Sure," I said, my voice flat. "Pasta sounds good." She turned and smiled at me again, and I wondered how many other smiles she'd given that day. The meal passed in silence. She asked about my day, and I lied. I asked about hers, and she lied. It was a performance, the two of us pretending we were still the couple in those framed photographs on the hallway wall. But something had shifted. I knew the truth now. I had seen it with my own eyes. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake in the dark. My chest ached with a storm I couldn't contain. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I needed to decide what to do, how to act, what part of myself I was willing to sacrifice. But one thing was certain, the illusion was gone. My marriage, my trust, my world, it would never be the same again. And as the rain tapped against the window, steady and relentless, I realized I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. The question wasn't whether Emily was unfaithful. The question was what I was going to do about it. The morning after the hotel, I woke with a decision already carved into me. No more doubts, no more questions. I had seen enough. Emily's betrayal wasn't a suspicion anymore, it was a fact. And facts demand consequences. She moved through the kitchen with the same easy rhythm she always had, frying eggs, humming under her breath, the smell of toast filling the apartment. It should have felt like home, but instead it felt staged, like I was watching an actress recite lines from a play we'd both long since abandoned. "Coffee?" she asked, turning with that same practiced smile. "Yeah," I said, though the taste of anything turned sour in my mouth. I watched her pour it, the small gesture of care she'd given me 1,000 times before. But now it felt like poison, because the hands that poured my coffee were the same hands that touched him. I wanted to tell her then. To slam the mug down and scream that I knew. That I had seen her kiss him under the hotel awning, that her lies were unraveling faster than she could spin them. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat in silence, the coffee cooling in my hands, while she chatted about some fictional client project. Her voice was steady, her eyes untroubled. She was either a brilliant liar, or she had convinced herself her lies were the truth. That night, I started planning. Divorce. The word rattled around my head like a loose nail in a tin can. It didn't scare me as much as I thought it would. What scared me more was the idea of living another year, another day, inside this performance. I began researching lawyers. Quietly, late at night, while she slept beside me. The glow of the laptop screen lit the walls, my face reflected back like a stranger's. Most firms offered free consultations. I bookmarked 3 names. At work, I moved like a ghost. My coworkers noticed, but no one asked. Maybe they thought I was tired, overworked, drowning in some personal fog. They weren't wrong. One evening, while Emily showered, I opened the drawer where we kept the mail. Her bank statements were tucked inside, unopened. I tore one open, scanning the charges. Most were mundane, groceries, gas, utilities. But one stood out. A charge at the Fairmont. Another at the smaller hotel I'd seen her enter. My stomach turned. Proof, undeniable. I put the statement back before she emerged, water still dripping from her hair, steam clinging to her skin. She smiled at me, asked if I wanted tea. I said no, because my mouth was too dry to swallow. The confrontation came 2 nights later. We were sitting in the living room, rain streaking the windows, the TV murmuring in the background. She was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by its glow. "I saw you," I said suddenly. Her head snapped up. "What?" I swallowed hard, my hands clenched into fists on my knees. I saw you. At the hotel. With him. Her face drained of color. For a long moment, she said nothing. Just stared, as if silence could undo the truth. Finally, she whispered, "You followed me?" The words landed like a slap. Not denial, not outrage, just that. You followed me. That's what you care about. My voice cracked. That I followed you. Not that you were kissing another man. Her eyes flickered with panic, then hardened. It's not what you think. I laughed, bitter and raw. It's exactly what I think, Emily. I saw it with my own eyes. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had seen too much. Felt too much. How long? I asked, my voice low. How long has this been going on? She shook her head, covering her face with her hands. I don't know. I didn't mean for it to happen. I stood, the energy in my body too much to contain. Didn't mean for it to happen. You kissed him, Emily. You lied to me. You came home to me smelling like his cologne and thought I wouldn't notice. Her shoulders shook. She whispered something I couldn't catch. What? I snapped. She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. I still love you. The words felt like a knife twisted in my chest. You don't get to say that. Not anymore. Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. The TV flickered in the background, meaningless noise. Outside, the city lights blurred against the rain. Finally, I said it. The word that had been burning my tongue for days. I'm filing for divorce. Her breath caught, her face crumbling. No, please. It's done, I cut her off. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I left her sitting on the couch, her sobs muffled by the walls of the apartment we'd once called home. In the bedroom, I packed a bag. Just the essentials, clothes, toiletries, my laptop. As I zipped it shut, I felt lighter and heavier all at once, like I was walking away from both a prison and a dream. When I carried the bag to the door, Emily was still crying, her face buried in her hands. I paused, just for a second. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her out of habit if nothing else. But I didn't. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and let it close behind me. The rain greeted me like an old friend as I walked to my car. The city stretched out before me, neon lights flickering against wet pavement, the air heavy with the scent of asphalt and salt from the sound. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to clarity. My marriage was over. And I was finally ready to let it die. I spent the first night after leaving Emily in a cheap hotel room near the waterfront. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, the bedspread patterned with faded shapes meant to distract from its age. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped, it rarely did this time of year, but I welcomed the noise. It covered the silence, filled the space that would otherwise have been unbearable. Lying on that stiff mattress, I thought about the years we'd shared. 6 years of mornings and nights, of holidays and small arguments, of laughter and whispered apologies. 6 years of building a life that now felt like a carefully painted lie. Betrayal isn't a sharp wound, not at first. It's a slow bleed. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, in the hollowness behind my ribs. Every memory of Emily was poisoned, tainted by the knowledge that while I was holding on, she had already let go. The next morning, I called one of the lawyers I'd bookmarked. His office was in a glass building downtown, the kind that reflected the gray Seattle sky in its mirrored windows. His name was Richard Hale, mid-50s, calm voice, the kind of man who had seen too many endings to be rattled by mine. He listened as I laid it out, piece by piece, the late nights, the hotels, the kiss I'd seen with my own eyes. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer sympathy. Just nodded, took notes, asked precise questions about finances, assets, whether there were children involved. "No kids," I said. My voice cracked on the words. For the first time, I felt relief in that. At least no innocent lives were tangled in this wreckage. "Good," he said plainly, though nothing felt good. "That simplifies things." Simplifies. A word for paperwork, not for heartbreak. By the time I left his office, the papers were already in motion. Divorce. Irreversible now. A legal process that mirrored the emotional one I had already endured. Emily called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice trembled, begging me to come home, to talk, to give her another chance. "Please, Mark," she whispered, breaking on my name. "We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I still love you. Don't throw us away." I replayed it once, twice, each time feeling my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to believe her, to pretend we could rewind time, erase the stain of betrayal. But love without trust is nothing but a cage. And I refused to live in a cage any longer. I didn't call her back. Instead, I started packing the rest of my things. Trips to the apartment were awkward, filled with silence and the scrape of boxes on the floor. Emily hovered nearby, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. "You're making a mistake," she said one afternoon, standing in the doorway as I folded shirts into a suitcase. "We can get through this." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "No, Emily. You made a mistake. And I can't live with it." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Once, that sight would have broken me. Once, I would have done anything to stop her pain. But now, it felt like watching a stranger cry. I carried the suitcase past her without another word. Weeks passed. The papers were filed, hearings scheduled. Life became a series of logistics, documents, signatures, meetings. My world shrank to forms and deadlines, each step a nail in the coffin of my marriage. But outside that process, life went on. Seattle's winter deepened, the rain turning to sleet, the air sharp with cold. I found a small apartment near Green Lake, the kind of place that smelled faintly of fresh paint and loneliness. The rooms were bare, the walls unadorned, but they were mine. At night, I'd walk the path around the lake, the water black and still under the lamplight. The quiet no longer frightened me. It felt cleansing, like the city itself was reminding me that endings are only beginnings in disguise. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for my phone to text Emily, about a joke, a memory, some small detail of my day. Habit is hard to break. But I never pressed send. Because the truth was clear, the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, no longer existed. The final hearing was anticlimactic. A sterile courtroom, a judge with tired eyes, a handful of legal terms that sealed the end of us. Emily sat across the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes red but dry. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. When the gavel fell, it was like a door closing. A clean break, even if the scar would remain. Afterward, I walked out into the cold air. The sky was unusually clear that day, the sun breaking through in weak golden streaks. For the first time in months, I lifted my face to the light and felt something close to peace. It wasn't joy. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But it was freedom. Looking back now, I realize betrayal doesn't just destroy trust, it forces you to rebuild yourself from the ground up. I lost a wife, but I found something else in the ruins, a version of myself I hadn't known before. Stronger. Harder. Maybe lonelier, but honest. Seattle still reigns, the city still hums with its restless energy, and I still carry the memories of what was. But I no longer carry the weight of her lies. One evening, walking through Pike Place Market, I stopped at a stall where a musician played soft jazz on a saxophone. The air smelled of coffee and roasted chestnuts, the neon sign buzzing overhead. I stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to the music. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Emily. I wasn't thinking about betrayal, or loss, or divorce papers. I was just, there. Present. Alive. And in that moment, I understood, endings hurt, but they also clear the way for new beginnings. Whatever comes next, it will be mine. The end.